Slavery is an institution of the law of nations by which one person is held against nature in the ownership of another. That's the Roman law definition of slavery, an institution of the law of nations by which someone against nature is held in the ownership of another. Across time and space, that's a fundamental definition of slavery, an individual held in ownership of another person. Slavery is the practice of treating some individuals as property and investing others with the kinds of rights that we invest in property in an actual human being. Now, slavery has been a pervasive and tragic part of the human experience, and it's easy in our modern liberal world to fail to recognize just how pervasive it has been as part of the human experience. Slavery has been practiced in most times and places, and the modern world, which saw the rise of abolitionism, and our world, where slavery is considered fundamentally illegitimate, and though it continues to exist only as a black market practice without the sanction of the state, has been a fundamental part of human history. And slavery is part of the story of law and justice, and in fact, it can help us focus on core questions about the nature of law and justice. And it intersects precisely with the conversations we've been having about Greek and Roman law, Greek and Roman political thought, the rise of Christianity. Slavery raises powerful questions about the meaning of equality, because slavery is fundamentally a status. It's a way of putting some humans above and some humans below. And in fact, it's not just any kind of way of organizing status. It's a particularly radical way of distributing power and status into one group and depriving another group of it. And it's a way that's transhistorical, that unlike many status systems, which are very particular to the kind of society that exists, slavery is a transhistorical. It's a pervasive way of distributing power differentially. So slavery raises a question of equality by focusing on differences of status in a way that transcends different societies. It also raises questions about dignity, because slavery is a kind of status distinction that fundamentally dehumanizes, deprives individuals of basic dignity. And in fact, one of the great historians of slavery pointed out that one of the most common metaphors of slavery is to make slaves into a kind of animal. There's something so degrading inherently about slavery that slaves have to be considered subhuman to be subjected to this status. Now, Roman law says that slavery is placing one human being in the dominium of another. That is the essence of slavery. Dominium is the Roman law term for property ownership. It's a kind of power that invests in one individual the ability to use, the ability to abuse, the ability to enjoy the fruits of something, and the ability to sell something. And those are the most fundamental powers of the master over the slave, is that the master can use the slave as he wishes, he can abuse the slave as he wishes, he can profit from the slave's labor because he owns the slave and therefore owns the slave's labor, and he can sell the slave. And this is the most fundamental act of the master's power, because there we see in the act of transferring, of selling the rights, the ownership over the slave, the idea that the slave is an article of property. Now, slaves exist in different societies, and they have different experiences. In some societies, slavery is harsher than in others. In some societies, slavery is more widespread than in others. The most common form of slavery across human history is small-scale domestic slavery, in which slaves are held in small numbers and live in the households of the very, very wealthy. Most societies have had small-scale domestic slavery. But what's unique about the ancient world, both classical Athens and the Roman Empire, is that slavery becomes, in fact, unusually important. If you look across history, few societies have practiced slavery on the scale or to the extent that the classical societies of Greece and especially Rome did. In these societies, which we might call slave societies or slave-based societies, slavery isn't simply marginal. It's more than just domestic slavery in the households of the very wealthy. Slavery becomes widespread. In the Roman Empire, something like 10% of the entire population is slave. And that is a huge proportion for a pre-modern society. In the Roman world, slaves fulfill roles that go far beyond simply serving the domestic needs of the masters. Slaves are fundamental in the economy. They play important roles in business, in industry, and in agriculture, where their labor is used to produce crops that are sold in markets. So the Roman Empire is one of history's few genuine slave societies. The Romans that we meet are surrounded by slaves. It's a very real problem for them. It's not an abstract issue. And the way that the thinkers that we've been exploring think about the problem of slavery can provide us with essential insights into what justice means to them.